Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining us. A few days ago, Chris wrote me an email, and he said, you talk about the middle class. What is an average middle class income in Panama? And I wrote back and said, it's a little bit more than I want to discuss in an email, so I'm going to take the next video and answer that question for you. So here I am, next video, answering Chris's question. It's also a useful thing to know in terms of understanding the Panamanian culture. Now, very simply put, Panama is an intensely family-centered culture, not unlike many others in the world. For a very long time, most of history, you depended on your family for support. When you got in trouble, you turned to your family for help. You didn't get much, if anything at all, from some government up there, and there was no one else who really cared or concerned enough about your welfare that if you got in serious trouble that they were going to help you. And since money was often tight in these cultures, it became even more important that the family pool its resources and work together to develop their own lives. It works, and it's still very much here intact in Panama, and it has a major impact when you think in terms of income. Now, let me try to tell you a little bit of what this is like from stories, a couple quick stories here. Eric is a friend of mine. He's a taxi cab driver. He would be middle class in Panama. And three years ago, I guess, it would have been late November, he told me that his Christmas club was almost ready. And I hadn't heard the words Christmas club in a long time. We had them in the U.S. many years ago, too. And for those who are unfamiliar with them, you had a special little account, usually at a savings bank, and you pledged to put in a certain amount every week or every 2 weeks, as you saw fit. They would give you a little coupon book with the dates when you were going to make those payments and how much you pledged to make, sort of like paying off a loan, only in this case is a reminder to you to make the payments. People would do that, and it's usually, as I remember, in late November, you take it all out. You use that money for your Christmas gifts, that's Christmas Club, and then shortly after January 1st, you'd open up the next year's Christmas Club. Now, that was a very common practice. I had one when I was a kid, but I haven't actually heard about it or seen it advertised in a very long time, although it may be practiced still in many parts of the U.S., and I'm just not aware of it. Still, it came as a surprise, and it was a nice surprise, because I liked the idea. I always thought it was a cool idea. So he had a Christmas club, and he was very excited. He was buying himself a television, a high-definition TV. He wanted the big 48, 52-inch variety. This was really, they'd already set aside the money and actually purchased the gifts for other members of the family. So this was, so to speak, his gift to himself. He just was delighted, and I was happy for him. That was later in November. In early December, I saw him again, and I said, well, did you buy the television set? And he said, no, I didn't. I said, well, what happened? He said, well, I was about to close it down, take the money, and buy the television when my mother called me and said, could I come out and take a look at a refrigerator? It wasn't operating. He said, I went out and took a look, and I said, this refrigerator is dead. There's no way we can repair it. So I bought her a new one, and I used the money to do that. And I said, well, gee, I'm sorry, I know you're not going to be able to get your television. And he said, no, it's not a problem. He said, my mother needed a refrigerator, so I bought a refrigerator with it. I can get the television next year. At no point did he seem even remotely disappointed by this, which had been a common, I think, response in many other societies. Not at all. In his mind, to be able to help out his mother at a time of need with money he was going to use for himself wasn't a burden, it was a blessing. It was perfect timing. She had that need, and he had the cash right there to saddle it, and he did, and put off his own concerns for another year. That is that kind of spirit I'm talking about, and it's not just a son and his mother. The families here, you're close to your cousins, your aunts and uncles, your nieces and nephews, as well as the immediate members of your family, and even beyond that. Some families can know their relatives out several points from the center, and it's really very important that you understand that the family operates in this style, unlike nations where there's much greater affluence, and we've gotten to a point where young people go off, young adults, and get their jobs and set up their own households and are expected to become independent financially. They may need some help in the beginning, but the whole goal is not depend on the family. Here, depending on the family, it's not so much depending, it's interdependence. It's everybody depending on each other to help each other out. It comes out of that history of not having anybody else to help them, but it remains very strong and powerful today and very satisfying to people, as I think most of you can understand. Now, another story. I was talking to, let's call him Jim. He was a Peace Corps volunteer and had worked in Cologne, which is the city at the other end of the Panama Canal on the Caribbean, a city that's been neglected and poorly treated for a very long time. And really, perhaps, well, it has the reputation of being the poorest urban area in Panama. Now, there is a really major project underway to rehabilitate the city, and we're all hoping that this time it's finished, it's done, and it does the job it needs to be done. But when John was a Peace Corps volunteer here, that wasn't the case. That wasn't even being discussed at that time. I'm a former Peace Corps volunteer myself, so I have a great deal of, I have an understanding and sympathy for volunteers and the challenges they face. And I said, gee, back then it must have really been difficult to work there because the poverty was so much greater. The city is so much poorer than Panama City or any other city I've seen in the country. And he said, no, there wasn't that much poverty. So what do you mean there isn't that much poverty? Cologne is famous for being impoverished. And he said, no, he said, nearly every family I worked with, they had a child or two who worked in Panama City. They sent money back. They brought gifts. They took care, like Eric. If there was a problem back at home, the kids got together, and later the grandkids, and worked it out. And they took care of whatever needed to be done. And it wasn't just a matter of buying appliances for the house. It may be the education of the younger kids in the family. All sorts of things. So the income of that family, if you had gone into Eric's family or into these families in Cologne or families all over Panama, and were able to get an accurate answer to the question, how much income do you bring into this household every month, you wouldn't get it. You wouldn't be believing it, really. I mean, what do you mean $800 a month total? How do you possibly get by on that? Look at you have so many things in the house. And of course the answer is the indirect income, the income from other members of the family. That comes not on a regular basis like a salary, but comes on an as-needed basis. That's a critical component to the households here, and particularly for elderly people who frequently live out in the countryside. Still, while their kids have all moved into the city, or most of them have, you can find that you look through the census statistics and you notice in the rural areas, there are many areas where the number of people over 60 is much higher than you would expect it to be. And that's because their children are in Panama City or in some other metropolitan area earning income, much of which will go back to them. They will live in the same house that they've always lived in. You'll see the homes. They're simple little concrete block homes. Sometimes they're painted with a little blue or pink or green, a pastel sort of color, sort of Mediterranean. It's nice. I always like it. But they're neat little homes. They're both cared for, but they're very simple homes. If you walked into them, you might find a television. You probably would. A stove, a refrigerator, a whole variety of appliances that were fairly modern, and be surprised because it wouldn't fit what you were seeing from the outside. And sometimes you'd see a four-wheel drive parked out in the driveway, and that's the kids coming in from the city to visit mom and dad or grandma and grandpa. The family keeps close track of each other. When there is a problem, somebody steps in. You might say, as I did on one occasion, just to see what the response would be, compared to other countries, I got the same response I expected, which is, since you kids now have sufficient income, why don't you help your parents by taking down that old cinder block house, or probably concrete block house, and putting up something new and better and prettier? And the response immediately was, why? This house is done well. We don't owe a penny on it. We never had a mortgage to begin with. It keeps the rain off our heads. We love this home. We raised a family in this home. It's not really important. And above all, our parents live there, and they have lived in that neighborhood their whole lives, and all their neighbors are their friends. And if they were to build, or we were to build for them a nice new home in the middle of that neighborhood, the neighbors would be offended, insulted. They'd feel as if they were being treated as poor people. Look at us, we're so rich, we're so important now, we have this fancy home. He said, no way, they would never ever do that. So this is just bits and pieces of how it operates and the significance of it. So it's very, very common for expats to come in who don't understand how the system works, to look at a simple home, particularly in the rural areas, and say, oh my gosh, these people live in terrible poverty. When in fact, if they went into the house, they talked to people, they knew how the family operated, they would realize, no, these people do not live in terrible poverty. Now, it is not to deny that there is poverty in Panama. Of course there is. There is everywhere in the world. It is nothing in comparison to what I have seen in Africa, in other Latin American countries for sure, in Asia, in some of the urban areas of Asia. It's shocking. In those countries, they may have the strong family system, but they often don't have the economies as Panama's to provide enough income so the kids can really help out mom and dad or grandma and grandpa the way that they can here in Panama. So the severe poverty that I've known from nearly 50 years of working in economic development in developing nations all over the world, that is just not here. And there's a number of people, though, who for a variety of reasons are impoverished, and they do need to be attended to, and people know that, and it is a matter of discussion, it's a matter of concern within the country, as it should be. But you can't jump to conclusions, or at least you should not jump to conclusions, just because a home looks modest. And you shouldn't jump to a conclusion that if you heard the salary of the head of household of this particular home, and perhaps his or her spouse, and you think, how could they possibly get by on that money? Well, it isn't just that money that keeps that household going. It's money from other members of the family as well. It's a family affair. So that's why it's difficult for me to say, oh, X amount of money a month is a middle class income here. And it wouldn't be comparable to Chris's society in all likelihood, because here, many of these, especially again in the rural areas, but in some of the urban areas too, people couldn't have mortgages. They didn't have them. They bought everything for themselves. It was a long struggle, but the point is that debt was not a major part of their lives. And I often think of many of my associates back in the United States who have very ample incomes, but they also have very ample debt loads. And housing is often one of the biggest ones they have. And even if they're renting, they pay a lot. Here, many families have no concerns about rent or mortgages because the home is completely paid for a long time ago. And it's not being torn down and a new one built and a big debt being taken on. So all of this complicates that picture, so you couldn't make a comparison. So if I told you it was $1,500 a month or something, what does that mean? It means nothing, because it's not the whole story, and you can't make a comparison. If you're going to compare the societies, you have so many different factors to take into account. So the amount of money is not the critical factor. The critical factor is the family, and it affects everything in Panama. So I hope that helps a little bit. It may not give the answer Chris was looking for, but it's the answer I can provide that makes the most sense to me. Thanks for stopping by, and I think next time I'll be talking about what's called rights of possession, ROP land, which is not titled land or titled residence. It's different, but people sometimes don't understand it. And I think I'll take a few minutes to talk about it in the next video, just in case it's of interest to a few of you. I do get questions about it, haven't for a while, but that's okay. I remembered them today, and I thought I'm going to do that next time. So until then, have a wonderful time. Have a great weekend, or whatever it is you're looking forward to, and I'll look forward to seeing you the next time.